All right, welcome. This is Nate Amidon and here with Jared Grove. We're both Agile consultants in the IT space and also both former military officers in the Air Force, former pilots. And we're doing this series on transitioning veterans, helping them break into the Agile space. So today we're going to talk about user stories, and it's one of the most
Yeah.
important ones to chat about. So let's uh, let's start with, why are user stories important? Why do we think it's important enough for us to talk about in this video? What do you think, Jared?
I think the biggest part is you go into any agile software development thing, whether they call it a ticket or a user story, it's ultimately going to come down to how do you understand what the business wants and put it in a format so that developers can develop that and you can deliver value. And that's kind of what user stories are. And it's a crux of what these teams are trying to do, which is deliver value for the business.
Mhm. And so if you're getting into any sort of tech world that has to do with any sort of software development, you're going to hear the term user stories. Like it's coming up, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so it's important to define. So let's do that first. So what do we think a user story is? You want to take a crack at it?
It's really just a way to convey what a user is trying to do with the software or the platform or whatever you're trying to develop and the reasons why they want it, what the business value is. And at some point through all of that, there's a way of what does it look like when it's finished and how do you know that you've actually delivered that? And that's acceptance criteria. And we'll go deeper in that later on.
Right. Yeah, and the way I like describe it is it's like taking a big rock of something you want to do. Right. So let's say you
Hmm.
want to build an app. Well, you can't just like build the app all at once. You have to break it down into smaller chunks. Okay. So we're just taking big rocks, breaking them into small rocks. Okay. And so it's called a user story for a reason. And we do it because it's from a user's perspective. And that's where the name came from. So we're
Yep.
telling the story of a user. Why would a user want a certain small piece of functionality?
hmm And it's not only why they would want it, but like what they're going to do with that functionality. So like they want something and maybe it's either they want it for their reasons of business value or they want to do something. That's another way to think about a user story.
Yeah, so it's really a small piece of functionality from a user's perspective. And it's in the Scrum Agile world, it's usually the responsibility of the product owner to create the requirements. So these are the business requirements of what we're trying to build, right? So
Yep.
analogy I would use for transitioning veterans, especially in the Air Force, would be like an air tasking order. Okay, this is like it's kind of the same thing. It's like what's a target we're going to go after? How do we take those all those targets and then we can prioritize what to do.
Yeah, exactly. And as you kind of talk about, one thing that's also with user stories is some people look at them as almost like a picture. And what that product owner is doing by writing that and describing what the user is trying to do and why it is they're painting a picture or showing everyone a picture so people can visualize what they're actually going to be developing and the solution that they're trying to do. And so that's another thing, like sometimes you think about a story, that's kind of where the story part of it is this bigger picture of the actual functionality, not just a list of requirements. It's not a user requirement, it's kind of a user story.
Right, right. So if you're transitioning out, it's important to know, hey, there's what a user story is. Small piece of functionality told from the user perspective, written by the product owner that goes into the Agile or Scrum backlog. And the product owner will prioritize the most valuable user story to do in like a sprint planning. So user stories are what gets done every sprint. And so they're the vessel for communicating business requirements and allowing teams to prioritize.
Yep.
So now that's the basic definition, basically. All right. So the what are the key components of a user story? Like what do we need? If you see a user story, you have to write one. What are the things
I
that we
mean, first of all, like a user story is going to go in a task management system or it's going to go on a card on a wall. So typically you're going to have a title on it that like is quick, succinct, and kind of gives an idea of what that functionality is so that the person keeps reading, understands kind of what it is. So you got to have a title is first thing.
Yeah, and let me just stay on the title for a second because I see this all the time. right? You have to be able to read the title and have a general idea of what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, it's pretty common sense for us. Like if we get we get a request or something from the military, like we have to know what that is without having to crack the whole thing open and read the entire thing. So titles are really important, but yeah, definitely needs a title. The
Also,
Yeah, go ahead.
to add also on like the title part, I think what the level of the title is and who could be able to digest it, it differs from team to team.
Mhm.
So a team that is really just kind of they own their own thing, then you can probably just make a title that and no one else ever looks at the backlog and you have a product owner who's the one, then it can probably just be between them. But if you have maybe like a relationship with the business or you have some stakeholders who are constantly like you're conversing with and using your user stories, you may want to make your title be something that they also can digest and it's not just team specific. So I think it's good and when you're thinking about writing user stories and what the title is think about your work and how does your backlog, how is it used to communicate with people? Is it just an internal focus thing or is it an external focus?
Yeah, yeah, because I could talk about titles here a lot, but
Yeah.
but it tells a story, right? I mean, that's what a user story does, and a sequence of user stories in a backlog should also tell a story. So the more clear your title is, the better. All right.
Yep.
And then the first main component is a description. Okay, so you usually have a title, and then you have a description, and this is pretty simple. It's like, what are we doing, and why are we doing it, and who is it for? Like, pretty simple. What are we doing?
Yep, I mean that's the thing. And it's a thing for the business to have a clear understanding of trying to convey to the developers why they want to do something and what you're going to do. And it's also an opportunity for the developers to have things in there so that it's almost their little small part of documentation that they can put in there too of what's the point of this story so they don't forget it when they're developing.
Right, right. And then the final piece on a user story, and there's other pieces. Obviously, the user stories can get more complex, but the other big component is the acceptance criteria. And this simply means like, how do we know it's done?
Yeah. And what does done look like? I think is the easiest way. If you're ever curious on oh, what's the acceptance criteria of this? One of my favorite questions to ask a team or a product owner when people are trying to really flesh out that acceptance criteria, what does done look like? How do we know we're done? When are we happy?
Mhm.
And normally that is a way that can kind of spur the ideas of what they can put down for that acceptance criteria.
Right. And at a core level, like those are the three main components. You need a title, a description of what it is, why we're doing it, who's it for, and the acceptance criteria so we can actually tell that it's done. Right. And that is how we communicate requirements to from like the business and the product owner to the engineering teams or the QAs or anyone that's doing the work so they actually know what we're doing. Right.
Yep.
And so I guess I'll also just note real quick in a lot of agile organizations, in a lot of companies, there's a ton more requirements that go onto a user story. There'll be different ways of tagging it and categorizing it, and you can add story points on how big it is. And so there's a lot of other different things that go into it. But at the core, those are the three main components.
And I think it's good to note that um, those are the key parts when we talk about like what's agile and delivering using user stories. Like the title, description, and acceptance criteria, like you said, that is the core. The other way that you tag or some of the drop downs you have to salute, whether it's a prod environments, those are things on like for an organization to be able to measure, delivery metrics sometimes for those type of things. So there should be a reason for those. But at the core, the key thing you want to make sure is even with all that extra stuff, that you're not minimizing writing good descriptions and definitely not minimizing writing good acceptance criteria for
Yeah.
the team and the product.
Yeah, which is a great segue into how should you write them? Right.
Yep.
And a lot of times, the product owner can be a great position for transitioning veterans because it's kind of a natural segue into just like, what are we doing? Right? What's the priority? What's the mission? How do we get it done? So there's some good techniques out there for how to write user stories. The ones that we like the most are the three C's. All right. So
Yep.
um,
Card, conversation, and confirmation.
all right. So at first that sounds a little weird. So what does card mean?
I mean, the way I always try to explain card is back before COVID, still in uh, some organizations where everyone's in there. When people wrote user stories, they used to put it on a small index card. They'd
Mhm.
put it up on the wall. They'd prioritize it.
Right.
And the best part about that small index card is it wasn't a huge long paper, it wasn't a, big long sheet that you had with all the requirements. It was a small index card with a description, acceptance criteria, and a good title. And the best part about that is it constrained what you were trying to do so that really you focused on writing things that were of value and that would drive the later C's, the conversation, the confirmation with the team. And so that's when I think of card, even though nowadays you may go to a place that doesn't have like actual cards and it's in some task management system. That's kind of the history of the C for card.
Right. And so and I think about it the same way, which is keep it short and sweet.
Hmm.
Okay. So we don't want to write huge business requirement documents. We don't want to have to scroll and print it out or submit it to ChatGPT to summarize. Like we should be able just to read it and understand what's going on. So short and sweet. The second one is conversation. And this one is my favorite because
Yep.
it also it helps you it helps you with the first one. If the first one is to keep it to the size it on an index card, for example, the second one is it's a conversation, right? We're not trying to explain every single little detail, right? It should be the start of a conversation between business and the technical teams.
Yeah. And I think it also goes into one of the earlier talks, you noted that product owners typically write user stories. And we talked about how veterans are normally good people that, it's a great role for you to transition to as a product owner position.
Mhm.
So, question to you, Nate, thinking about conversation, how is a veteran who's brand new, who may not have never been in the tech sector, how are they going to write user stories that a technical person can then suddenly just get taken?
Yeah, I mean, because this is a lot, this is one of the barriers, obviously,
Yeah.
to getting hired is because it's like, well, you're not technical enough to write technical requirements. And the answer is, I know, because you're not writing the technical requirements, right? It's the ability to have the conversation with the technical team and to really understand the technical implementation and the value it gives to the business. And so that's the conversation that needs to happen. And because a lot of times you can write a requirement that you think might be easy to implement technically, but it's a lot more challenging. So, so the product owner position in the user story is a conversational tool, and it
Yep.
allows for collaboration and alignment between the business and the technical resources. And honestly, that as veterans, that's what we do, right? We're constantly getting, hey, here's an objective, and then it's like, how can I work with my team to figure out how to execute on it?
Yeah. So although you may be in charge of writing the first card as a product owner, a new product owner, an experienced product owner, after you're not going to write the final card. That is what comes out of the conversation.
Right.
That is what it is. And that's what I just want to point out here. And that's why when sometimes it can get really scary about, well, how am I going to, break into the tech sector if I don't have this experience? If you know how to have conversations with people and integrate with the business and talk to developers, you can do great in something like this and driving those conversations.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And then the final C is confirmation.
Hmm.
Right? And so that to me means the user story has to, you have to be able to validate that it got completed. That's how
Yes.
I read it.
Yeah, I mean it's validated, goes back to my original question of what is done. I think I look at this is acceptance criteria. This is your test plan. Those the conversations can be happen, but it's how does the team know it's done? How can we take this physical card off of the wall and put it to the closed section?
Mhm.
That's what that confirmation is. Because if you all agree on it and the business is aligned on it and the technical folks are aligned on it, then people will be happy when it delivers and they'll know there won't be a misalignment on what you just did the last 2 weeks of your sprint.
Right. And it also will drive you to write stories that can actually be confirmed
Yes.
because sometimes there's just very vague stories out there that you will never know can be completed. Like if you can't tell it it's ever done, then you need to rewrite the story so it can be confirmed. Okay.
Yep.
Now
I
the
also think the other thing with confirmation that is good with it is a great point when you're doing the refinement with your technical folks to actually figure out whether that user story that you wrote is sized properly or something that can be maybe delivered in a sprint or a couple weeks or whatever, however fast you're trying to deliver it. Because it's at that confirmation normally that you'll hear a technical person goes, "Oh, you want me to do this in 2 weeks? Ah, I can't do that, but I could do this." And then maybe that has drives a little bit more of the conversation. And so I think that's another key part of that third C of creating a good user story.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And so those three C's, card, conversation, confirmation, those are the kind of the standard three C's. Now, when we teach this and we do product training, I always like to add in a fourth C, especially if you're in a larger enterprise. All right. And that
Yeah.
fourth C is coordination. And the bigger you're, so depending on the size and scope of what you're doing, you may not be able to do everything yourself. All right. And you may need to coordinate with other teams. You may need to coordinate with other people. And so having a space in your user story to just address like what are the dependencies for us to actually get this user story done?
Yep.
And I think it's just a good practice to always keep in the back of your mind, like you're almost never working on an island.
Yeah, and it's not only dependencies of your work, is is your work going to affect anyone else too? I think that's the other thing. So it's work, it's how teams are, they affect you and how you may do it. Maybe you're deprecating something and it's going to cause other teams to have to update their services. Before you take on that user story, you should probably be coordinating with them too. So it's a great way to think about it of, hey, who do we need and who are we going to affect?
Mhm. All right. So that's basically, I think that's basically the best way to think about how to write user stories. All right. If you keep those three, four C's in the back of your mind, um, I think that's a good technique to have. So the kind of the final piece I want to talk about is some of the techniques that are out there for writing user stories. All right. So we've taught this, we've seen this, we've done this. Um, One of the most popular ones out there is as a user. I want something so that I can do something like do blank. All right. But it's an as a user format. You might hear that.
Yep.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Jared?
I mean it's a technique and it's I look at it as it's a technique to make sure that the users of the systems that you're creating or you're updating that they are the forefront of it because you should be producing value for it. So that's why like I love it as a user for the most part for 80% of the stories that I help teams write.
Mhm.
It's great because it keeps the user like at the focal point of this is why our team is here. And so I love the as a user part. Um, I mean, there's some other stuff of where we can have pitfalls of it, but that's kind of
Right.
my thoughts. Yours?
Yeah, I mean, generally, if you ask for just like, should you write them like this? The answer is yeah. I think you should do that because you want to get. It's a great way to just say, I know who it's for, I know what we're doing and why we're doing it. Okay, it kind of hits all the buckets or it checks all the boxes. Now, I have seen people overuse it because sometimes there's just more technical stories that it doesn't really apply, right? And
Yeah.
so, if there isn't an actual user, it can get really weird, right? Like as a database, I wanted, like it just doesn't work the same. So,
Yeah.
so I
I
don't
mean,
think you have to do it.
we've had this issue too where we have some infrastructure stuff and before we sometimes have tried to shove that into a as a user format
Mhm.
and and it kind of missed the boat and we missed the point of like why are we doing it and because of that we didn't have good conversations and
Right.
so I think going if the as a user I want this so I can do that doesn't drive the necessary conversations then it may not be the right format for that type of user story.
Yeah. It's like I love the idea of it's a technique. And back
Yep.
from our like flying days, there were procedures and then there were techniques. And so techniques are good for certain scenarios. So I just always keep that in the back of my mind.
Mhm.
And the same technique for for writing acceptance criteria, right? And so there's the same sort of things that are out there. to make sure you're writing good acceptance criteria. Again, just use them as a technique.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to my biggest techniques on outcomes or acceptance criteria is it testable? Normally you want something that's testable so that you can test it before it goes out. And is it clear that we have achieved it? Is it done?
Hmm.
If you hear starting in the acceptance criteria or the system's updated, but you can't really understand why the system's updated or what it's updated with, then that's where I would probably have some more conversations with the team to try to figure out like how do we actually define when we can move this to closed and be happy with it.
Right. No, absolutely. So there's techniques out there. They're good. They're helpful. Use them if they help you out. All right. So, um, I think that pretty much wraps up a user stories, like what they are, why we use them. All right. Some techniques for writing them. And, at the end to say like, it's super important for you to understand, especially if you're a veteran transitioning into or applying to a product owner position. You're going to want to know what a user story is. You're going to want to be able to speak to it and relate it to your experience.
Yeah, and that's what I think it is. It's you are looking at it if you're going in a product owner position. It is a tool that you want to be very, knowledgeable on how to use so that you can get the most out of the team to be able to deliver value for the user and the business. And
Mhm.
so I think that's just kind of the focus of those.
Yeah. And honestly, it's a lot like what we did in the military. Okay, all we're doing is prioritizing like what are we doing and then how do we do it? All right, and that's kind of the core of how we got missions, how we got task orders, ATOs, all of those things. It's just a different format and a different domain, but it's the same general concept. So, yeah, so I would say hey, thanks for watching the video, and we'll put our company information down below, and if there's anything we can do to help, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks. Bye.
Tip and break.
Break. Stop recording.
No, started winging that.
Those are hard
All right.
sometimes. User story